The sun beat down mercilessly on the cracked asphalt, the air thick with the scent of dust and dried grass. It was a scene of quiet desolation, with only the sound of the wind whispering through the empty road. And in the middle of it all sat Duke, a German shepherd, his once shiny coat now matted and worn, his eyes heavy with fatigue, yet unwavering. Duke had been here at this very spot for 4 long years, ever since the night of the crash. The crash that took away the Carter family. It had been the dead of night when it happened. A car swerved off the road during a rainstorm, tumbling down the embankment, leaving a twisted wreck of metal and broken glass. The family was gone. And Duke? He had been thrown from the car, left to wander in the darkness until he found his way back to this spot. And there he stayed, for 4 years. Clara, the local florist, was the first to notice. She was the one who had often passed by the road on her way to the market, and she was the one who would always pause, eyes soft with sympathy, whenever she saw the dog sitting there, waiting. Every day, without fail. One afternoon, while she was picking up her flowers at the small-town market, she noticed something different about Duke. He seemed weaker. His eyes, which had once shone with an eager energy, now looked dull. He had never moved from that spot, no matter the weather, no matter how cold or hot it was. But today he seemed to be waiting for something or perhaps someone with more urgency than before. Clara felt a pang of sorrow deep in her chest. She couldn't stand to see him like this anymore. She had heard the stories, the whispers from the townsfolk about Duke's tragic past, the rumor that his family had died in a car crash. But she had never been able to bring herself to do anything about it. Until now. Duke? Clara whispered softly as she approached the dog, crouching down to his level. She held out her hand, but Duke didn't move. His gaze stayed fixed on the distant road. Why are you still here, boy? Don't you know they're not coming back? Her voice cracked with emotion. She had always admired Duke's loyalty, his determination to wait for his family. But now she saw the toll it had taken on him. His once proud stature was now slumped in exhaustion. Come on, Duke. Let me take you back to town. There's a warm bed for you, food, maybe even some company. You don't have to wait here alone anymore. But Duke didn't move. He just stared at the road, his eyes locked in a trance, as though he had no intention of leaving. Clara's heart broke a little more. It was then that Noah walked by, a young journalist from a nearby city, who had recently moved to the area to take a break from the hustle of his former life. He had seen Clara speaking to the dog earlier but hadn't thought much of it. Now, seeing her standing there with her head hung low, his curiosity was piqued. Hey, Clara, what's going on? Noah asked, his voice filled with concern. Clara glanced up, startled by his voice. She wiped a tear from the corner of her eye and shook her head. It's Duke. He's been here for 4 years now, waiting for his family. But they're gone. Noah felt a twinge of disbelief. 4 years? But why hasn't anyone helped him? Why is he still here? I don't know. I've tried, Clara replied, her voice thick with emotion. He refuses to leave. I've offered him food, a place to stay, but he won't leave. He just sits here, day in and day out, looking for them. I think he's been waiting for something, or someone, to come back. But I don't think he realizes they're never coming back. Noah stepped closer to Duke, kneeling down to the dog's level. Duke's eyes flickered towards him, but his attention quickly returned to the road. His loyal gaze never wavered. Noah exhaled slowly, his heart heavy with sympathy. He could see the pain in the dog's eyes, the unyielding hope that had been growing inside him for all these years. Poor guy, Noah murmured. Is there any way to help him? Clara shook her head, her eyes filled with sorrow. I don't think so. I don't think there's anything that can make him understand. But I'm afraid he's not going to make it much longer if he keeps this up. Noah's mind raced as he thought about what Clara had said. This dog Duke was more than just a pet. He was a symbol of loyalty, of undying love, and an endless search for something that may never return. Later that day, Noah couldn't shake the image of Duke's unwavering stance. It gnawed at him, the idea of a dog so loyal that it would spend years waiting for something, for someone who would never come back. He decided then that he couldn't simply walk away. He needed to know more. Noah went home that evening and started his research. What he uncovered shocked him. Duke's family, the Carters, had been involved in a tragic car crash 4 years ago, but the mystery surrounding their disappearance went far deeper. The official reports had mentioned the crash, but little else. Duke, it seemed, had been the only survivor. The rest of the family, no one knew what had happened to them. Determined to find out the truth, Noah decided to visit the site of the crash the next morning. He had to know what had really happened to the Carters, and why Duke had stayed there all this time. As Noah drove down the long, desolate road the next morning, his thoughts raced. What had happened to the Carter family? Why had Duke refused to leave, despite everything? And most importantly, could he help Duke finally find peace? The sun was still low in the sky when Noah arrived at the crash site the following morning. The wind howled as it swept through the overgrown grasses, and the air smelled faintly of pine and earth. The place looked abandoned, yet there was an eerie sense of stillness here. It was as if the land itself was holding its breath, waiting for something to be uncovered. Noah parked his car at the side of the road, stepping out into the cool morning air. He was alone, just as he had been the day before when he first saw Duke. He glanced down at the map he had printed out and checked the directions. According to the local records, this was the exact spot where the Carter family's car had gone off the road. The only thing missing now was the wreckage that had once littered the ground. As he made his way down a small incline, Noah felt a sense of foreboding wash over him. The crash had occurred in a narrow bend in the road, just before a thick stand of trees. The trees swayed gently in the wind, casting long shadows on the ground. But what struck Noah the most was the utter silence. There was no noise, no birds singing or wind rustling through the leaves. Just an empty, abandoned spot. Sheriff Thompson, a tall man in his late 50s, was waiting for Noah at the foot of the incline. His wide-brimmed hat cast a shadow over his face, and his weathered features looked even more solemn in the gray morning light. "Thought you might show up," Sheriff Thompson said, his voice low and gravelly. Noah nodded, his curiosity piqued. "You were here that night?" Sheriff Thompson's expression darkened. "Yeah, I was one of the first on the scene. It was bad, real bad. There wasn't much left of the car, just twisted metal and broken glass." Noah stood still for a moment, trying to process the weight of the situation. "What happened to the family?" "The family?" Sheriff Thompson repeated, his eyes narrowing. "Well, that's the thing. No one really knows what happened to them. The car went off the road, but we never found any bodies. Just Duke." Noah blinked in disbelief. "What do you mean? How did Duke survive? And the family? You never found them?" Sheriff Thompson sighed deeply. "Nope. No sign of the family. It was like they vanished. There were no witnesses, and no one knows what happened after the crash. The investigation didn't go anywhere. Just a dead end." A shiver ran down Noah's spine. "But Duke, he's still waiting. All this time." Sheriff Thompson gave a grim nod. "Yeah, that dog. He's been waiting ever since. The town thought he'd leave, but he never did. Every day, rain or shine, Duke's been sitting right here, looking down that road like he's waiting for them to come back. It's the damnedest thing I've ever seen." Noah's mind was spinning. He had always heard stories of animals' loyalty, but this was something else entirely. How could a dog hold onto such hope for so long? It didn't make sense. And yet, here Duke was, still waiting, still hoping. The next few days were spent piecing together what little information Noah could find about the Carter family. He visited the local library, scouring old newspapers and records, but most of the details were sparse. It was like the Carter family had never truly existed. The only thing Noah could find was a family portrait, a photo of Thomas, Linda, and Lucas Carter with Duke in front of their home. The photo was yellowed and frayed, but there was no mistaking the love in their eyes. This was a family that had been torn apart in an instant. It wasn't until Noah spoke to Rachel, the local postmistress, that he learned the true significance of the crash. As he sat across from her in the small, dimly lit post office, Rachel recounted the tragic event in heartbreaking detail. "They were good people, the Carters," Rachel said softly, her eyes downcast. "Thomas and Linda, they were the kind of people who would do anything for their community. And little Lucas, he was always so bright, so full of life. That's why it's so hard for us to believe they're gone. We've had no closure. Just a missing family." "Did the family have any relatives?" Noah asked, trying to piece together more of the story. Rachel shook her head. "None that we know of. Thomas was an only child, and Linda, she didn't have any family in the area. I heard rumors that they had plans to move, but nothing ever came of it. It's like they just disappeared. And Duke, he stayed here, like he was waiting for them to come back." Noah felt a lump in his throat. "Why didn't anyone try to take Duke?" Rachel looked up at him, her face filled with sympathy. "We did try. We offered him food, shelter, but he wouldn't leave. He wouldn't even come close to anyone. It was as if he was waiting for something, or someone." As Noah drove back to his small apartment that evening, he couldn't shake the image of Duke's steadfast loyalty. He knew he had to help. He couldn't just let this dog suffer, not when there was still a chance for closure. But where could he even begin? He thought back to the post Rachel had shown him, the only piece of evidence linking the Carter family to this town. The portrait, the picture of Thomas, Linda, Lucas, and Duke. It was all he had to go on. As Noah stared out the window, the evening light casting long shadows across his desk, an idea began to form. Maybe it wasn't just about helping Duke. Maybe, just maybe, he could help the Carter family find their way back too. And so Noah made a decision. He would share Duke's story with the world. He would find the truth. For Duke, and for the Carters. Noah sat at his desk, staring at the screen of his laptop. His fingers hovered over the keyboard, hesitating. The story he was about to write felt like more than just a news piece. Felt like a mission. He couldn't help but feel that he was on the verge of something important. Something that could bring closure not only for Duke but for the Carter family, wherever they were. He started typing. In a small town just outside of Jackson, a dog named Duke has been waiting for the past 4 years for his family to return. Through storms, heat waves, and freezing winters, Duke has remained loyal, sitting at the very spot where his family's car crashed, refusing to leave. But what happened to the Carters? And why has Duke not given up? This is a story of love, loyalty, and a bond that transcends time. He paused, rereading the words. It was a beginning. It wasn't much, but it was enough. He clicked post and watched as the story began to spread across social media. The shares started trickling in, then snowballed into something bigger than he had ever expected. Within hours, Duke's story had gone viral. People from all over the country, strangers who had never heard of Duke or the Carter family, began to comment, to share their own stories of loyalty, love, and loss. Comments flooded in. "This story broke my heart. A dog so loyal, waiting for 4 years. I have tears in my eyes. Someone find this dog's family. He deserves to be loved again. Duke, if you're reading this, we're all rooting for you." Lucas sat at the kitchen table, scrolling through his phone while the morning sunlight streamed through the window. He had heard about the viral post, but he hadn't been able to bring himself to open it. Until now. It was his mother, Linda, who first mentioned it. She had been on the phone with the grocery store when she stumbled upon the story. Her voice had been shaky when she said, "Lucas, you need to see this. There's something about Duke. Your dog." At first, Lucas thought it was just another heartwarming viral post. One of those feel-good stories that were meant to tug at your heartstrings. But when he opened the article and saw the picture of Duke sitting on the side of the road, looking as if he had been waiting forever, something inside him snapped. There, in the middle of the story, was a photo of Duke. And below it, a few words that made Lucas's heart race. Duke has been waiting for his family for 4 years. His owners, the Carters, were involved in a tragic crash, and Duke has remained at the crash site ever since, refusing to leave. The investigation was inconclusive, and no one knows what happened to the family. Until now. His breath caught in his throat. The tears he had buried for so long began to well up in his eyes. "Mom," he choked out, his voice barely audible. It's him. It's really Duke." Linda, who had been quietly reading beside him, glanced at his phone, and her eyes widened in disbelief. "Lucas? After all these years?" Her voice faltered. "Are we really going to do this?" Lucas felt his heart pounding in his chest. He had never stopped thinking about Duke. He hadn't dared to hope that his dog, the one he had grown up with, would still be out there, waiting for him. But there he was, Duke, waiting patiently for the family that had disappeared all those years ago. Waiting for him. "I have to go back," Lucas said, his voice firm, even though his hands trembled. "We have to go back to him, Mom. We need to bring him home." Noah, who had been tracking the progress of his post throughout the day, saw that it had begun to gain even more traction. The story was no longer just about Duke. It was about the bond between a dog and his family, and the power of loyalty and hope. It had touched a chord in so many people, resonating with them in ways Noah hadn't expected. The comments were overwhelming, full of people urging him to find Duke's family. His phone buzzed. It was a message from Clara, the local florist. "Have you heard from Lucas? He's been looking for Duke. I think he saw your post." Noah felt his heart leap. Lucas had finally seen the story. The piece was having its intended effect. It was time to bring the reunion to fruition. He immediately called the sheriff, Sheriff Thompson, who had been following the story closely. "Sheriff, it's happening. Lucas has seen the post. He's coming to find Duke." The sheriff's voice crackled through the phone. "Well, it's about damn time. That dog's been waiting for years. If Lucas is on his way, I think it's time we make sure that Duke knows his family is coming back for him." The town buzzed with excitement as word spread that Lucas was returning. The sheriff, Clara, and even the local newspaper editors were all eager to witness the momentous occasion when Duke would finally be reunited with the family he had never stopped waiting for. Noah, though excited, was anxious. He had written the story, had uncovered the truth, but now it was up to the people who mattered most, Lucas and Duke, to bring it all together. He had no idea what would happen when they finally met face to face, but he had a feeling it would be the most emotional moment he had ever witnessed. That evening, as the sky began to darken and the air cooled, the townsfolk gathered near the road where Duke had waited for so long. The anticipation was thick, and it felt as though the town itself held its breath. Lucas, standing at the edge of the road, looked down at Duke, who sat there as always, facing the horizon. The dog's eyes met his, and for the first time in years, Duke seemed to recognize him. His ears twitched, and he took a cautious step forward. The crowd was silent, watching as Lucas took one slow step after another. His heart was in his throat. "Duke!" Lucas's voice trembled as he called out. The dog's head tilted slightly, as if considering the name. Then, to everyone's surprise, Duke stood up, his body stiff with hesitation, and slowly padded toward Lucas. "I'm here, boy," Lucas said, kneeling down to Duke's level. "I'm home." And in that moment, Duke approached, his steps tentative at first, then with increasing confidence until he was standing right in front of Lucas. The reunion was quiet but charged with emotion. Lucas reached out a trembling hand, and Duke, after a long pause, nuzzled it gently. Tears sprang to Lucas's eyes. He pulled Duke into a tight embrace, murmuring, "I never wanted to leave you. I'm so sorry, boy. I thought I lost you forever." The atmosphere around the crash site was thick with anticipation, the crowd standing in respectful silence. The only sounds that could be heard were the distant whispers of the wind and the faint rustling of leaves, as if the earth itself was holding its breath, waiting for this long-awaited reunion. It felt as though the entire town had come together, each person eager to witness the moment when Duke and Lucas would finally find each other after so many years. As Lucas knelt down to Duke, he felt the weight of the years slip away, his heart racing as the dog slowly approached. It was as if the entire world had paused for a brief second, leaving only the two of them. Duke's eyes, once filled with confusion and doubt, now held something deeper: recognition, understanding, and perhaps just a flicker of the joy they had once shared. Lucas reached out slowly, his hand trembling with emotion. "I'm here, boy," he whispered. "I'm finally here." Duke stopped just in front of him, standing still as if unsure, as if wondering whether he could trust this reunion. For so long, he had been alone, waiting for his family to return. But this voice, it was familiar. The touch. Was it the touch he had missed for so long? The moment stretched on, the tension palpable. Then, with a tentative step, Duke leaned forward, brushing his head against Lucas's hand. It was a soft, hesitant gesture, but it was enough. Lucas's breath caught in his throat, and before he could stop himself, tears began to fall, streaking down his face. "I never stopped looking for you, Duke," Lucas whispered, his voice barely a breath. I thought you were gone. I'm so sorry I couldn't be here sooner." The dog nuzzled him again, and Lucas pulled him close, his arms wrapping around Duke's neck in a tight, loving embrace. The crowd, which had been quietly watching, now began to murmur softly, some wiping away tears of their own. The sight of Duke, so faithful, so loyal, and of Lucas, so desperate to find his dog, was a raw and poignant reminder of love's endurance. For a moment, Lucas sat there on the ground, holding Duke close, the dog's head resting gently against his chest. The world around them faded into the background, and all that mattered was this bond that had survived the passage of time. As the minutes passed, Lucas spoke softly to Duke, as though reassuring him that everything was going to be okay. "You're safe now. We're going home together, Duke. No more waiting. No more loneliness." The crowd began to disperse slowly, sensing the sacredness of the moment. Clara watched from a distance, a smile tugging at the corners of her lips. She had been one of the first to notice Duke's suffering, and now, seeing him reunited with Lucas, the sadness that had lingered for so long began to melt away. It was a bittersweet happiness, knowing that Duke could finally find peace. Sheriff Thompson, who had been quietly observing, approached Lucas with a soft smile. "You did the right thing, son. Duke's been waiting for this moment longer than any of us could have imagined. You gave him hope when there was none." Lucas looked up at the sheriff, his eyes still wet with tears. I didn't know if he'd remember me, but I had to try. He's my family." Sheriff Thompson nodded, understanding the depth of the connection. "You were right. You brought him home." As the sun began to set, casting a warm golden glow across the landscape, Lucas stood up, taking Duke's leash in hand. "Let's go home, Duke," he said gently, his voice filled with the kind of warmth only a family could share. Duke looked up at him, his eyes now filled with trust and understanding. There was no hesitation in his steps as he followed Lucas toward the car. It was as though he had always known this moment would come, that the wait had not been in vain. The drive back to the Carter home was quiet, with only the sound of the tires on the gravel road breaking the silence. Lucas kept glancing at Duke, who was resting his head on the seat beside him. For the first time in years, Lucas felt a weight lift from his shoulders. It wasn't just about finding Duke. It was about finding himself again. The pain of the past, the confusion and sorrow that had followed him all these years, seemed to vanish in the presence of the dog he had once loved so dearly. When they arrived at the Carter home, Lucas led Duke through the front door. The house, though quiet, still felt like home. The familiar creaks of the floorboards, the scent of old wood and the faint trace of his mother's perfume. All of it brought back memories of a simpler time. The time before the accident, before everything had changed. Linda, who had been waiting anxiously inside, stood up as she saw Lucas and Duke enter the living room. She gasped, her hands flying to her mouth. For a moment, she couldn't believe her eyes. "Lucas? Is it really him?" she asked softly, her voice trembling. Lucas nodded, his own voice thick with emotion. "It's him, Mom. He's back." The reunion was as powerful as the one between Lucas and Duke. Linda knelt down, tears streaming down her face, as Duke walked slowly toward her, tail wagging ever so slightly. For a brief moment, Duke hesitated, then moved into her arms. Linda embraced him as though she had never let go. Her words came out in a whisper. "I'm so sorry, Duke. "I'm so sorry we couldn't find you sooner." Duke licked her face, his own tail wagging, as if to say that it was all right, that he understood. The dog who had waited so long for his family was finally home. Days turned into weeks, and slowly but surely, Duke began to adjust to his new life. He spent his days lounging around the house, contentedly sleeping on the couch or basking in the sun. His once-worn coat began to shine again, and his steps became stronger. But what mattered most was the bond that had been rekindled. Duke was no longer waiting for something that would never come. He had found his place again with his family. Noah watched from a distance as the story of Duke's reunion continued to spread across the internet. People were inspired, their hearts touched by the loyalty of a dog who had waited for years in silence, hoping against hope that his family would return. Noah had helped bring closure, but it was Lucas and Duke's love for each other that truly brought healing. As Noah walked to his car one evening, he received a message from Clara, simply saying, "They're home." A smile tugged at the corners of his mouth as he stared out into the horizon, the setting sun painting the sky with shades of orange and pink. It was a reminder that even in the darkest times, there was always hope. And sometimes, the greatest stories were the ones about love that never fades, no matter how long the wait. It had been a few months since Duke's reunion with Lucas and Linda, and life at the Carter household had gradually returned to a semblance of normalcy. The once silent house now echoed with the sound of Duke's tail thumping against the floor, the soft patting of his paws as he wandered through the rooms, and the laughter of Lucas and his mother as they spent their days together. The grief that had haunted them for so long, after the crash, the uncertainty, and the long years without Duke, had slowly been replaced by a quiet sense of peace. Lucas had taken a few weeks off from work to settle back into life with his dog. He spent his days taking Duke on long walks, sometimes along the winding country roads where Duke had once waited. Each step Duke took was a reminder of the years lost, but it was also a symbol of new beginnings. They had made it through the darkness together, and now they were learning to trust again. One afternoon, Lucas sat on the porch, Duke lying beside him, his head resting on Lucas's knee. The dog's fur was thick and healthy now, and he was once again the same playful companion Lucas had grown up with. They had rediscovered each other in ways that words couldn't express. "I think you're finally getting used to being back, aren't you, boy?" Lucas murmured as he scratched behind Duke's ears. Duke let out a soft whine, almost as if in agreement, before lifting his head to gaze at the sunset. It was a peaceful moment, one of quiet contentment. Inside, Linda was in the kitchen preparing dinner. Her hands moved with practiced ease as she chopped vegetables and stirred the pot on the stove. She glanced over at the window, where she could see Duke and Lucas on the porch, and for the first time in a long time, a true smile played across her face. There was no longer the deep sadness in her eyes that had once been there. There was a lightness, a feeling of gratitude that she could finally allow herself to feel. Clara had been a regular visitor at the Carter home since Duke's return. She often brought flowers or freshly baked bread, and every time she came, she was met with warm hugs and genuine smiles. She had become an integral part of their lives once again, a symbol of the town's collective effort to help reunite the family. One afternoon, as she visited Lucas and Linda, she looked over at Duke, who was now sprawled out on the living room rug, content and relaxed. She smiled softly. "He really is home, isn't he?" Clara remarked, her voice filled with warmth. Lucas nodded, his gaze lingering on his dog. "Yeah, he's home. After all this time, he's finally found his place again. And so have we." Noah, too, had continued to keep in touch with the Carters. His article about Duke's story had become a viral sensation, with millions reading about the dog's loyalty and the heartbreaking journey to reunite him with his family. But what moved him the most was the way the story had impacted so many people. He received messages from across the globe, telling him how Duke's story had given them hope, helped them reconnect with lost loved ones, or reminded them of the power of unconditional love. In a way, Duke's story had become more than just about a dog and his owners. It had become a symbol of resilience, of the belief that even when it seems like all is lost, there is always hope for renewal. Noah received a call one evening from Lucas, his voice sounding lighter than he had ever heard it. "Hey, Noah," Lucas said, his tone filled with gratitude. "I just wanted to thank you. You don't know how much it means to us that you told our story. You helped bring him back to us. And we'll never forget that." Noah smiled as he listened to Lucas's words. It had been a long journey for all of them, but now the Carters were whole again, and Duke had his family back. That was all that mattered. Weeks passed, and life moved forward for the Carters. The house was filled with the sound of laughter, the clinking of dishes, and the joy of shared moments. They had learned to treasure each day with Duke, knowing how close they had come to losing him forever. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a soft orange glow across the landscape, Lucas and Linda sat together on the porch, each holding a cup of tea. Duke lay at their feet, contentedly resting, his eyes half closed. Linda glanced at Lucas, her expression peaceful. "I still can't believe it, Lucas. After all this time, after everything we've been through, we finally have him back." Lucas nodded, his voice full of emotion. "I didn't think it would ever happen, but I'm so glad it did." The years that followed were filled with simple joys, long walks, family dinners, and moments of quiet reflection. Duke became a symbol of hope in the town, and his story continued to inspire people. Visitors came from far and wide to meet the dog who had waited so long, and many left with a renewed sense of faith in the power of loyalty and love. But for Duke, the waiting was over. He had finally found his place. He no longer had to look to the road with longing in his eyes. He was home with the family he had always loved. As the seasons changed, the Carters continued to cherish every moment with their loyal companion. And as Duke grew older, his steps slower, they knew they would never take for granted the love that had brought them all back together. He had taught them that love, no matter how long the wait, could always find its way home. Duke's story had begun as one of heartbreak and tragedy, but it ended with a reunion that transcended time. The loyal dog, who had sat by the side of the road for so long, waiting for the family he thought he had lost, had been rewarded for his unwavering faith. His loyalty had brought him home. For Lucas and Linda, it had been a journey of rediscovery. The bond with Duke had been reignited, and together, they had learned that love, no matter the distance or the time that passes, can heal even the deepest wounds. And so, as Duke lay peacefully by their side, surrounded by his family, the Carters knew that this was their new beginning. A beginning filled with gratitude, love, and a deep understanding that family is not just about blood. It's about loyalty, connection, and the willingness to never give up on those you love. This story illustrates the profound bond between a dog and its owner, emphasizing themes of loyalty, love, and the healing power of time. Duke's unwavering wait for his family, despite the years that passed and the harsh conditions, is a testament to the strength of emotional connections. It also reflects the idea that true love is patient and enduring, and no matter how lost someone may feel, they can always find their way home. The story conveys that loyalty and hope never truly fade, no matter how long the wait. It encourages us to hold on to love, to never give up on those we care about, and to cherish the relationships we have. It also reminds us that sometimes, the deepest bonds transcend time and hardship, and when reunited, they can heal the deepest wounds. If you enjoyed this touching story, don't forget to like the video, leave a comment with your thoughts, and share it with your loved ones. Your feedback and engagement are what inspire us to create more meaningful stories like this one. Be sure to subscribe to our channel so you never miss another heartwarming tale. Every interaction is a great source of motivation for us to keep bringing you even better content. Thank you so much for watching. We truly appreciate your support. Your comments, likes, and shares mean the world to us. Until next time, stay inspired and take care.